Hi, everyone. Welcome to the last week of class. This week, we will be covering disruptive impulse control and conduct disorders. So with this group of disorders, there's, a reason why they were grouped together. So all of these disorders that are listed in this section of the DSM manifest in ways where the person has problems in both emotional and behavioral regulation. But the source of the variation of the disorders is relative to its emphasis on problems in two different types of self-control. And so there's a continuum of essentially the manifestation of the struggle. So on the continuum for conduct disorder, for example, to intermittent explosive disorder. So if you think of this on literally a continuum where on one end conduct disorder and on the other end there's intermittent explosive disorder, this is on that continuum of behaviors and emotions. So on one end with conduct disorder, that is largely on poorly controlled behaviors that violate the rights of others and that violate major societal norms. So, and we'll talk about this more when we get to conduct disorder. And then on the other end of the spectrum is intermittent explosive disorder, and that the focus is largely on poorly controlled emotions, outbursts of anger that are disproportionate to the interpersonal or other provocation or other psychosocial stressors. So on this continuum, one end is conduct disorder, which is focused on behavioral regulation. And on the other end is intermittent explosive disorder, which is focused on emotional regulation. And then kind of in the middle of this is oppositional defiant disorder, also known as ODD, in which the criteria for behavior and emotions are essentially evenly distributed. So emotions showing anger and irritation, and behaviors of argumentativeness and defiance. And with this group of disorders, the first onset tends to be in childhood or adolescence. Disruptive impulse control and conduct disorders have been linked to a common externalizing spectrum associated with the personality dimensions labeled as disinhibition and then inversely constraint, and then to a lesser extent, negative emotionality. So essentially what this means is when an individual is in distress or struggling with something, we tend to have a tendency toward internalizing behaviors or externalizing behaviors. Internalizing is literally when you move inward. Like these are individuals who I will also say that in terms of gender distribution, girls, females, women tend to be more internalizing with the way that they cope, and boys, men, males tend to be more externalizing, and that's socially informed in many ways. So internalizing is when it's happening internally, other people can't really see it. Maybe they can notice it in terms of like a depression or a silencing. These can be individuals who may engage in self-harming behavior, and then externalizing tend to be kind of more explosive or outward. It's focused on other people or outside objects. So it's very observable when a person is engaging in externalizing behaviors. And then the shared personality these personality dimensions can account for the high level of comorbidity among disorders. So as we will talk about, it is possible to be diagnosed with more than one of the disorders in this group of disorders, and also comorbidity with substance use and antisocial personality disorder. So oppositional defiant disorder, this would be an assessment question that is posed to a caregiver. Do you have a lot of power struggles with your child? So with ODD, the essential feature is frequent and persistent pattern of angry or irritable mood, an individual being argumentative or defiant in their behavior, and being vindictive. So criteria A has 8 different categories or criteria. And so this is a pattern of angry, irritable mood. You can see that that's one of the categories here. Argumentative and defiant behavior is one of the categories, and vindictiveness is one of the categories. So these symptoms should have lasted over at least 6 months, and the individual should be displaying at least 4 of the 8. And this is, so it can be, it doesn't have to be like 1 out of each, it can be any 4 in any of the categories, and exhibited during interaction with at least one individual who is not a sibling. So kind of normalizing some of that sibling rivalry, some of the, tension and distress that can happen amongst siblings. So in terms of angry and irritable, this is an individual who often loses their temper, is often touchy and easily annoyed, is often angry and resentful. In terms of argumentative and defiant behavior, often argues with authority figures, or for children and adolescents with adults. Often actively defies or refuses to comply with requests from authority figures or with rules. Often deliberately annoys others, often blames others for their mistakes or misbehavior. And then finally, vindictiveness, has been spiteful or vindictive at least twice within the past 6 months. So that's criteria A. Criteria B is that the disturbance in behavior is associated with distress in the individual or others in their immediate social context. So this could be family, peer group, work colleagues, or it impacts negatively on social, educational, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. So you can see that though the first onset is in childhood or adolescence, that this criteria also fits for adults. And then criteria C is that the behaviors do not occur exclusively during the course of a psychotic, substance use, depressive, or bipolar disorder. Also, the criteria are not met for disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. So those are mutually exclusive. Okay. And then intermittent explosive disorder. So oppositional defiant disorder, this is in the middle of that spectrum. Intermittent explosive disorder, this is on the emotional end of the spectrum. So the question is, do you ever become aggressive when you lose your temper? So A through F here. Criteria A is recurrent behavioral outbursts representing a failure to control aggressive impulses as manifested by either of the following. So they have to fit either 1 or 2 here. Verbal aggression, so temper tantrums, tirades, verbal arguments or fights, or physical aggression toward property, animals, or other individuals. This has to occur twice weekly on average. So again, it could be 4 times in 1 week, 1 time in another week. But over the course of 3 months, each week. So essentially over the course of 3 months, what is that? What would that be? 12 well, there's 4 weeks in a month. For 3 months, that's 12 weeks, twice weekly. So it has to happen 24 times. I hope my math is right on that. And then the physical aggression does not result in damage or destruction of property and does not result in physical injury to animals or other individuals. And then 3 behavioral outbursts involving damage or destruction to property and or physical assault involving physical injury against animals or other individuals occurring within a 12-month period. So over 12 months that this person has had at least 3 behavioral outbursts that have resulted in destruction or physical harm. B, the magnitude of aggressiveness expressed during the recurrent outburst is grossly out of proportion to the provocation or to any precipitating psychosocial stressors. So, if somebody were to, bump into this individual walking past them, that their response to that or reaction to that would seem out of the ordinary. It would be too big, too much, of course, like culturally informed for what had happened to them. The recurrent aggressive outbursts are not premeditated. So they're impulsive or they're anger-based. So it happens instantaneously. They didn't plan it. And they are not committed to achieve some tangible objective. So this would be something that wouldn't result in like money, power, or intimidation. It was just a reaction to what had happened. So again, it wasn't premeditated and it's not in trying to achieve some kind of status, money, some incentive. The recurrent aggressive outbursts cause either marked distress in the individual or impairment in occupational or interpersonal functioning, or are associated with financial or legal consequences. chronological age is at least 6 or equivalent in developmental level. So this could be, an individual who, may even be, who may be developmentally delayed in some way, or they may be like an advanced 4-year-old. So taking that into consideration. So the recurrent aggressive outbursts are not better explained by another medical disorder or mental disorder, or another medical condition, or the physiological effects of a substance. So for children between the ages of 6 and 18, aggressive behavior that occurs as part of an adjustment disorder should not be considered for this diagnosis. So it would just be an adjustment disorder with potentially some kind of specifier. All right, so conduct disorder, this is on the behavioral end. Does your child get into a lot of trouble would be a question for a parent or caregiver. So criteria A, as you see, has 15 different pieces to it. So a repetitive and persistent pattern of behavior in which the basic rights of others or major age-appropriate societal norms or rules are violated, as manifested by the presence of at least 3 of these 15 criteria over a 12-month period, and from any of the categories below with at least 1 criterion present in the last 6 months. So you're looking over a 12-month period, but in that last 6 months, at least 1 of these criteria needs to be present. So 3 over a 12-month period, but 1 of those 3 within the last 6 months. So you can see there's 4 different categories here: aggression to people and animals, destruction of property, deceitfulness or theft, and serious violation of rules. So criteria B is the disturbance in behavior causes clinically significant impairment in social, academic, or occupational functioning, and that if the individual is 18 years or older, criteria are not met for antisocial personality disorder. So those are mutually exclusive in terms of diagnosis: conduct disorder and antisocial personality disorder. All right, so when you are looking at or going through the criteria for conduct disorder, there will also be specifiers that will be necessary for you to mark. So you're specifying onset, whether it was in childhood, adolescent, or maybe there's not enough information to determine the onset, so it would be unspecified. So childhood is prior to 10, adolescent is past 10. So then you are specifying if there is limited pro-social emotion, a lack of remorse or guilt in their actions. If it is callous, there's a lack of empathy, unconcerned about performance, shallow or deficient affect. So this would be where you may be able to mark more than one of the specifiers, but you would probably want to privilege the one that's most prominent. And then you would specify severity as well. So you would have all 3 of these specifiers for conduct disorder if it's mild, moderate, or severe. But you would have the onset specification, the type specification, and then the severity specification. So antisocial personality disorder was covered in Ivy's lecture last week, so I won't go into detail about that since you've already learned about it, but just noting that because this disorder is closely connected to the spectrum of externalizing conduct disorders, as well as 2 disorders in the adjoining chapter of substance-related and addictive disorders, it is dually coded here in that portion of the DSM, as well as in the chapter of personality disorders. So just letting you know, sometimes diagnoses fit in multiple categories. So then we will talk about pyromania and kleptomania. These will be the last that we talk about this week. So pyromania, the screening question here: do you start fires? So there are 6 criteria here. The first is deliberate and purposeful fire setting on more than one occasion, tension or affective arousal before the act, fascination with, interest in, curiosity about, or attraction to fire and its situational context. So it may be paraphernalia, uses, consequences, like there's just this real interest in fire. The individual gets pleasure, gratification, or relief when they are setting fires or when they are witnessing or participating in the aftermath of the fire setting. The fire setting is not done for monetary gain. So, it wouldn't be for insurance purposes or anything like that. It's not done for monetary gain. It is not done as an expression of socio-political ideology. So, anything like riots or looting or something like that, to conceal criminal activity. So it's not that the person, committed a crime, there's a dead body, and now they want to burn evidence. To express anger or vengeance. So it's that it doesn't have like a affective purpose in that way. To improve one's living circumstances. So again, they're not living in this like, broken down house, and they would get a new one built, or they would get compensation in order to move. It's not in response to a delusion or hallucination. It is not as a result of impaired judgment. So again, there wouldn't be some kind of intellectual or neurocognitive issues happening, or any sort of substance intoxication. So this person would have to not be under the influence of substances for this type of diagnosis. And then the fire setting is not better explained by conduct disorder, a manic episode, or antisocial personality disorder. So this would be a separate diagnosis from any of the ones listed in criteria F. And then finally, kleptomania. Question is, do you steal things? So of the 5, there's 5 criteria here to meet for this diagnosis. You have a recurrent failure to resist impulses to steal objects that are not needed for personal use or for their monetary value. There's an increasing sense of tension immediately before committing the theft. And then there is pleasure, gratification, or relief at the time of committing the theft. So there's some affective determinants here. The stealing is not committed to express anger or vengeance, and is not in response to a delusion or a hallucination. And then finally, the stealing is not better explained by conduct disorder, a manic episode, or antisocial personality disorder. So again, this is a distinct diagnosis from those 3 in criteria E.